Hey YouTube, so I'm sorry about the lighting. I feel like it looks really weird in here. But I've got like a lamp right there, so we'll see what happens. I just wanted to talk real fast about psychological diagnostics. And obviously, as most of you know, if you follow my other account on YouTube, I'm a psych major. With occasionally I take, criminal justice classes and whatnot. And right now what we're doing a lot in my abnormal psych class is talking about diagnosing and using the DSM-4. They're going to come out with the DSM-5, I believe in January. They're coming out with it. Obviously the diagnostics are going to be a little bit different when that comes out, and a lot of us are going to have to relearn the DSM-5 versus the DSM-4 because I think they're going to include different disorders. I think they're cutting a few. I believe that they're taking DID, dissociative identity disorder, and they are moving it to a clinical disorder, actually, which I find completely wrong. That's just my opinion. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Hold on, I'm going to turn this off. It's getting way too hot in here. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but I know it's been discussed, and I personally, that's just in my opinion. I mean, I'm not a professional, but I'm just saying. But anyway, I'm digressing. But I want to talk about it because very few people have actually looked at a DSM. DSM stands for Diagnostic Statistical Manual. But very few people have looked at it. And a lot of people, surprisingly, are diagnosed with things and they've never looked at it. And I mean, obviously, they probably wouldn't, and it might make matters worse if they did. But the thing is that a lot of people just think, they go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist and they're like, you have this. You are schizotypal. You are, you have schizophreniform. You have a personality disorder like borderline or bipolar, things like that. And they're just like, oh, that's what I have. This is what I am. Let's get some medicine and counseling to fix this. But what I want to say is that there are, for almost every disorder, there is a spectrum. Obviously, we've all heard about the autism spectrum, where you have everything from mild, moderate symptoms to very severe and life-changing symptoms that affect more than just the person. They affect everybody, and it's just a big deal. And oftentimes, with the more severe symptoms, they're medicated heavily. But those kinds of spectrums are inexistent for a lot of disorders in psychology. And in the DSM, they'll say, this disorder falls under this spectrum and things like that. And what I want people to understand that I didn't understand. I mean, maybe I'm dumb, but I just want people to understand. When you are diagnosed with something, or when someone else is diagnosed with something, it's very easy to label. Be like, they have this. Okay, that's that. Instead of saying, this person has these tendencies and this kind of problem, and so they're showing these kinds of symptoms. The reason we have names for things, and the reason there are categories and there are criteria for disorders, is so that the counselor or the psychiatrist can say, they can pull different symptoms, together that the person is experiencing, and they can label it. And so it's almost, in my opinion, more for the therapist's sake than it is for the person, because I think we do a lot of harm telling someone, you have this, deal with it, now we'll work on it, because I think it sort of cripples the person. And I mean, I know it's not like that for everyone, and I know some people, their problems go way beyond tendency, and especially with things like schizophrenia, it does have more of a biological factor. But things like not borderline, bipolar, things like bipolar, borderline too, but bipolar specifically, people are like, they'll treat it with medication. I understand sometimes it's necessary, but sometimes I wonder, what would it be like if someone said in the counseling, the therapist said, instead of telling them that they had bipolar, if they said, you have the problem of, being excessively emotional, and sometimes you're super happy, sometimes you're super sad, and it goes on and off, and what we need to do is work on evening you out. And sometimes I wonder if giving it a name and a label makes it worse, because there are a lot of things with, a lot of high-functioning bipolar people, or people who have bipolar tendencies, that get by just fine. And I think that some cases where people, are told you have this disorder, you have this problem, that telling them what it's called and labeling it, and then there being so much information out there like, you have this, and so you're going to have problems with this and all this stuff. And then the horrible stories we hear about people with bipolar or, different disorders, it's like, you get kind of a stereotype. And sometimes I wonder how much of it isn't like in a very stretched form groupthink. How much of it isn't, someone thinking, oh, well, I have this disorder and I act like this. And then based on that and based on what they see from other people, they exaggerate that and they get kind of stuck. And, I think this is very, very particularly prominent for youth, because I'm sorry, but too many 15-year-olds are being diagnosed with bipolar. If I hear one more 15-year-old is being diagnosed with that, I think I'm going to come unglued. Because it's like, you know what, I know that you have that problem, but at 15, I was crying one minute, laughing the next. You are extremely emotional when you are in adolescence. Extremely, particularly in your teenage years. And, doctors know that. Therapists aren't stupid, but for some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason they love handing out these diagnoses and all of these, different medications. And the fact of the matter is, the medications you get for most of these psychological disorders or personality disorders, you are going to be changing your chemical makeup and the different hormones that are being, created throughout your body. And so if someone with bipolar takes medication to affect their serotonin, they could get dependent on that medication and then later legitimately develop a disorder because of the medication they took when they didn't need it. And, I know that your serotonin levels are going to be, off in your adolescence, but that's normal. You're going to have hormonal fluctuations and things like that. And, like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm only a sophomore. But to me, just stating my opinion, it makes logical sense that the more you label things, especially in adolescence, the more they're going to stick to that label, and they're not going to show as much progression as they would if you otherwise just said, you kind of have a tendency to do this, or these things are happening and we can fix them, instead of giving them a label and a group and a stereotype that they can fit into. Because, with Google nowadays and with all the different social media, we can communicate with people, we can research on our own, and eventually we're going to develop our own opinion, or we're going to develop our own ideas about things, and sometimes we might get them wrong. We're not professionals, and even if we do get them right, we can continue to get ourselves stuck in that. Heck, by getting yourself caught up in what you're supposed to have, you could develop something even worse, like, you could develop some sort of paranoia with your mental state or your health. And I think that if people held off on diagnosing them and they didn't do it so quickly and so soon, it might be better. And the MMPI-2 and all of those other tests that are out there, they're written very well. They're written so that, you cannot as easily lie. It's very difficult to lie on those tests. I've taken them before. In fact, I believe I've taken every psychological test that counselors administer to their clients. But they're tests, and people make mistakes. And what if I made a mistake and I accidentally answered a question wrong? Because you circle in bubbles. What if I accidentally circled the wrong one? Or, what if I misunderstood the question? What if I answered incorrectly on purpose? Because you can do it. It's harder to, but you can. And, there are just things like that. But that's what people use to diagnose you with. And for a majority of the time, that's the basic foundation of what they use. And then, of course, they use their own, what they've gathered from counseling and things like that, and what other people have told them, or told you about them, rather. And so, they do their best, but I wish that people would just hold off on the diagnosing until they've had a lot. I just feel like there should be more counseling, specifically in adolescence. In fact, let's just leave adults out of it completely, because adults are a totally different story. But just adolescents, between, actually all the way from, childhood, they can be diagnosed with things, and they can be put in stereotypes. And especially when the children are very, very young. I think it would just be better if you told the child, or if you told the parent, they have tendencies, they are doing these things, they are leaning towards this direction. Let's stop it before it gets to that point, you know, but let's not be hasty in diagnosing them with it, because once you do that, you put yourself, the parents, the child, even the child's friends or classmates into this, you know, sort of idea and this concept of what they're supposed to expect from that person. Expectations are so important, because even if it's not popular to have this disorder, if in any way a child gets attention from that disorder, or they seem to feel special because of that disorder, then it's going to be a lot harder for them to let go, because most of the time children who have disorders, specifically bipolar, you know, they feel like they're not getting enough attention or enough love anyways. And so if you say, oh, you have this disorder, and then all of a sudden they're getting attention from a counselor, they're getting attention from, you know, their parents, grandparents, relatives, church family, classroom even, you know, if enough people find out about it and they get attention from it, it's going to be harder for them to let go. Especially as a teenager, you know, you tend to have this this misconception that you're unique in your struggles, and that you have a very different life from everyone else. And sometimes it's kind of an ego boost for a child or a teenager. You know, you think, I have these problems, I'm deep and complex, and that's normal, but it is something that will further a problem. And so I think that people should just stop. I just know too many people who've been diagnosed with it. It's just like, just stop it, just stop, just please stop. They're 15, they're gonna be emotional. Whew, calm down. But whatever. How much time do I have on this thing? I don't know.